Hello and welcome to the shop. Today I'm going to work on a Christmas tree shelf. My wife and my youngest boy collect these little Department 56 style houses, and they have all these Christmas scenes that they like to set up for the holidays. In our previous home, we had a large mantle over the fireplace where they would put their houses and set the scenes up. Here we don't have a fireplace, so we have nowhere for them to display their Christmas houses. We found these Christmas trees, and they are essentially discs. You take 5 to 6 discs of descending size and you run a post up the middle and build a Christmas tree, and it's just shelves that you can stack all of your houses on. What I've decided to do, that takes up too much room because the bottom shelf will be about 4 feet in diameter. I've decided to lock the back half off so that it can be pushed against the wall. That way the shelf will only stick out about 24 inches from the wall. It will also provide support. The tree won't be able to tip over because it will be slightly leaning against the wall. We're going to make this shelf out of a 4x8 sheet of 1/2 inch MDF. We'll start by cutting the MDF into segments to make it easier to handle, and we'll use this piece here to make a quick circle cutting jig for the table saw to be able to cut our semicircles. I'm preparing to cut the 4x8 sheet into smaller sections to make it easier to handle, and when cutting MDF, you always want to use some form of a respirator because you don't want to get this in your lungs. It's really nasty. And of course I have some hearing protection. Now let me show you how we've got set up for this cut. I'll be using a circular saw, and we've just taken a nice ruler and we're going to use that as a straight edge. Our cut line is right here. We're 1.25 inches off that cut line, which is the distance from the blade to the end of the foot of my saw. We're just going to run the saw right along the ruler, and that should give us a nice straight cut. While we're doing that, I'll be on this side. My brother-in-law is going to be on that side, and he's going to hold a vacuum hose close to the exit port or the waste port on the saw. And that the hope is we'll catch a majority of the material instead of throwing it all over the garage and having it become airborne. The first cut went very well. Now what we need to do is, and hopefully we can see this, this is the one I did, it's 25 3/4. I'm going to come down and cut this piece. And the reason why I want this long piece at the bottom, I want to be able to keep that so that I can use it to make a jig to be able to cut these on my table saw. So let's go ahead and measure for, looks like 24 inches. Now that I have my stock reduced to more manageable dimensions, I'm ready to start building a circle cutting jig for my table saw. This is not going to be an in-depth jig. This is going to be a down and dirty jig, just enough to help me cut these 5 semicircles. I did not film the build of this circle cutting jig, and I think after you see it, you'll understand why. I started off by milling up a piece of red oak. I made it just wide enough to fit into my miter slot, and just thick enough to where it rides right above the bottom so there's very little friction. After I got it attached with 3 screws, which I did countersink so they don't interfere with the piece of wood I'm cutting into a circle, I ran it through the blade and got a 0 clearance on the left side. From the left side, I measured over, and you'll see my marks, 2 foot, which is actually 1 foot from here to here because when I make the circle, it'll make a 2-foot circle. So that's for my top shelf. I've got a 2.5 foot shelf, a 3-foot shelf, a 3.5 foot shelf, and a 4-foot shelf. I found the center of the board, and I drilled a 1/8 inch hole, and I took a roofing nail And I used a roofing nail because it was flat. It would give me a nice flat surface. And I've just basically poked it through the 4-foot mark. And when I bring you'll see in a few minutes, when I bring the pieces of wood that I want to cut the arc on, I'll actually drill a hole in the piece of wood, drop it onto this nail, and then I'll be able to spin it through the blade. The first thing I did was find the center of my board. And then off of the center, I drew a 3.5-inch box. This will account for the post that's going to go up the center of the tree to hold all of the shelves in place. And then I found the center point of this box and I drilled an 1/8-inch hole. This hole will allow me to lay this board on top of the nail or past the nail on the circle cutting jig through this so that I can rotate it on the table saw and make my circular cut. Here's how I envision this working. My jig is on the table saw, and I have taken the first piece that I want to cut into a semicircle, and the hole that we drilled back here in the back, I've slid the nail through that hole, so I can now pivot it on the jig. I'm going to raise the blade so that it is a little bit higher than this top piece of wood, and we're just going to start by running the board through and cutting off all of the odd sections or the long pieces until we get it to where it's relatively close to a circle. Then we'll center the jig and we'll just pivot it all the way through like that to get as best of a circle as we can. I'm ready to make the final cut. You can see how it's already starting to round out. But before I make the final cut, I wanted to stop the saw and clean all of the debris out of the way so I didn't have to deal with any of that getting caught or possibly getting thrown. So we're going to do that, and then I'll come back and we'll make our final cut. And here is the first finished shelf. This is the 3-foot shelf. We have 4 more shelves to cut of different sizes. You can see we got a great finish using the saw. I'm very happy with how this turned out. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut the other 4, and I'll come back and show you what they all look like. I have all 5 of my shelves cut out, and I have to say that I am extremely happy with how this simple circle cutting jig worked on the table saw. I will give you one bit of advice. This MDF makes a great deal of fine dust, so between each shelf, thoroughly vacuum your saw, the tabletop of your saw off, and especially in the miter slots, get those good and clean, because I didn't do that between the first 2, and I had some issue where that fine dust was packing in there, and on the second shelf it became a little difficult to move the sled into the blade. I'm going to take my jigsaw and I'm going to cut these 3.5-inch squares out of all 4 of the lower shelves. And once I get them cut out, we'll test them against the 4x4 that I have. And you know, if we need to, we'll use a file to adjust the fit so that we get a nice tight fit. I think that's a pretty good fit. I've got 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch square cut out of each of the bottom 4 shelves. The top shelf, we don't cut that out. This is going to sit on top of the post, and I've got some brackets that will go under to help hold it on. Next up, we need to start building the stand that these will attach to. Here's my idea for a stand for this Christmas tree shelf unit. I'm going to cut 3 21-inch pieces of 2x4. I'll cut 2 additional pieces that I'll use as angle braces to brace these together so that they're nice and sturdy. The 4x4 post will sit in a pocket right here between the 3 pieces and be bolted to those pieces. The first shelf, or the largest shelf, will sit on top of this, and it will sort of set like this. And then I can screw it down to these legs for a nice tight fit. That should give it a pretty stable base to set on. I'd like to show you what I came up with for a stand for my Christmas tree shelf. These 3 pieces are 21 inches in length. I did not film cutting them. I just went to the table saw and ran them through the blade with the miter gauge. The 2 brace pieces here, I set my miter gauge for 45 degrees. I lopped off a 45-degree angle, and I just kind of brought it out here and laid it against these 2 pieces of wood and just kind of rough guessed where I wanted it to be, drew a line, lopped off the other side, and then I just used this as a template, laying it on top of this one to be able to cut this out. I'm all set up and ready to permanently put this stand together. I've got a little Tite-Bond glue, and I've got 4 joints, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to glue them up really well. I've got some 4-inch screws, and we'll come in from here and we'll countersink those, and that'll help us pull these together and hold them together tightly while the glue dries. For the area here and here where I really don't have anywhere to glue or to put a bolt in, I'm going to use these L brackets, and we'll put one here and we'll put one in here, and I'll use some long screws to get that attached. We'll take the bottom 4-foot semicircle, lay it on top of this, and we're going to screw it down with a couple of screws, probably 2 in each of these 21-inch sections. And I don't want to glue that down, because if it gets damaged, I want the ability to be able to remove it and replace it. Once that's all glued down, we're going to come back in, and I've got additional L brackets. We'll set our post, and we'll put an L bracket here, here, and here to hold our post. And I've got some nice lag bolts that we'll use on that to really give it a good tight fit. And then we'll be ready to go ahead and add our other 4 shelves. The frame is all together, and it's very solid. You can see a few spots like here and here where I had a little warpage, and I had to get a hand plane out and kind of clean that up a little bit, but it looks really nice. This is the cutoff of the post, and it slides right down to there. It's a nice tight fit. And what I want to do now is the final step is we'll put our bottom shelf on. We're going to line it up, make sure it's flat along the back. That looks good. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and countersink 2 screws in each of the 3 posts to hold this on, and that'll really sort of help firm it up as well. I've gone ahead and mounted the first shelf to the base. I just basically sunk a few screws, and the way I'm going to mount the 4x4 is I'm going to use some more of these L brackets. I'll put one on each side, one up front, and then on the back I'm going to come in and toenail on either side in with some of the 4-inch screws. That should give it a pretty solid base. These won't show. We'll probably paint them white, but what I think my wife will end up doing is probably putting like some cotton over here to sort of simulate snow for the village. So I'm not overly concerned about those showing. I've got my braces mounted. I used the cutoff to get them set to where they need to be and to make sure I had a nice tight fit. I've already test fit the 6-foot 4x4. My post that goes up the middle that holds the other 4 shelves is going to be 6 foot in height. And let me go ahead and slide that in there. Got a nice tight fit. And all I need to do is bolt it on, and I'm ready to start measuring and bolting the shelves onto the main post. I've got my L brackets for my shelves mounted to the tree. Now, what I did is from the tip of the tree to the top of the base was 70 inches, and I divided that by 4, which was 17 and a half. So every 17 and a half inches, I marked and put my braces. Now I'm ready to start adding the shelves. Since MDF can deteriorate if you drive a screw into it and remove the screw multiple times, I purchased some of these pronged T-nuts. And what I'm going to do is drive these down into the top of the MDF shelf. And I also purchased some 3/4 inch machine screws, which I'll run up through the bottom, through the L bracket, and attach to the T-nut. And hopefully that'll help me avoid too much deterioration over the next couple of years. Here's a shot of the shelf, and it's all ready for paint. As you can see, my quality control engineer is giving it a once over. Looks like it passed inspection. All that's left is to get the paint on it and get it moved into the house. I'd really like to thank you for joining me for this project. I'm not going to paint this as part of the video. I think the video's already gotten long enough. All I'm going to do is put a coat of white primer on it, and then I'm going to put a coat of white paint on it. And then my wife will put, little layers of cotton, and then they'll put the houses on there to kind of represent snow, and they'll decorate it up, and it'll really look nice. I really would like to thank you for hanging out with me for this project. I enjoyed doing it. I hope you enjoyed the project, and I'd like you to know that you are always welcome in my shop. Come back and see me again real soon.